Mr. Voss, do you remember in your life when you started consciously paying attention to how people were communicating?
Yeah, I probably when I first started noticing and was intrigued by it, it was in my early days of being a cop. A little over a year into the job, Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. In my second assignment, a bunch of detectives got kicked out of the detective bureau and put back in uniform. There was a dispute between the detectives and the administration, and they said being promoted to detective is tantamount, or being made a detective is tantamount to promotion. You're getting assigned to the detective bureau is tantamount to promotion, and if it's tantamount to promotion, we deserve to get paid more. And you got to watch out how the bureaucracies will get you. And one of their key points was once somebody gets assigned to become a detective, they never get rotated back out into the field, back out into uniform. Therefore, we've been promoted. And the bureaucracy said, all right, we can fix that. We're going to put a bunch of you back in uniform right now. You got to be careful. And so the upside was, the new guys like me that are, I'm a crime fighter, I'm an adrenaline junkie. I throw bad guys in jail. I protect the innocent. And when you're a youngster, you never really learn how to talk to people. And suddenly I'm riding in a car with somebody who's really good at talking to people in a soft power. And this guy's using soft tones of voice and respect and solving problems faster than I ever did. And I think I've always been about, what's the best way to do it? I don't care what it is. I just want to know the best way to do it. And when I saw these guys demonstrating in front of me, getting to solutions calmly and faster than I did, I'm like, there's something to this tone of voice thing. This how do you talk to people? Issuing orders ain't the best way to do things. So I think that's when I first started to notice it. And then as it popped up in little ways here and there, when I got to New York, assigned to the Joint Terrorist Task Force, and it was originally on surveillance, and then I got rotated inside to be an investigator. And there was this guy named Larry Wack that made cases everybody envied. I mean, everybody envied Larry. And fortunately, I got to sit really close to Larry. And, among a cadre of great investigators, nearly everybody there had had a book or a movie about cases they'd worked on this terrorist task force. Conversely, when I was in Pittsburgh, nobody in the whole division ever had a book or a movie about a case that they did. And in New York, they were everywhere. And all these superstars admired Larry. And Larry was just this soft-spoken, quiet, talk to you matter-of-factly kind of guy, or friendly, and had gotten some of the most dangerous people on earth to bond with him and to work for him, as a cooperating witness. And that was another time when I noticed that, soft skills, man, there's something to this. So when I finally volunteered on a suicide hotline and started actually getting taught the ins and outs of soft skills, I think, my mind was ready to learn.
So what you noticed in those initial detectives, but then as well, Larry, was maybe controlling the tone of voice, a gentleness. Were there some deeper insights that you were starting to pick up on, or was it until you got to the hotline that you were, being taught this is how you do it?
Well, I think I really noticed more tone of voice. I remember the detective back at in uniform in Kansas City. His tone of voice really struck me, and his respect to people, leading with respect. Getting respected by leading with it, but very deferential. And I think I probably noticed tone of voice first. And then the instruction for the suicide hotline, and crisis hotline, was very much more the mechanics of it. Although the mechanics were a little vague by the time I got to the crisis negotiation unit with the FBI. I started getting very specific with the mechanics, so much so that the specificity that we worked out at CNU, when I went to Harvard to teach, the Harvard guys, you guys have defined this so much more clearly than we ever thought of defining And I think that was because as an FBI agent hostage negotiator, you're teaching local police officers hostage negotiation. And local cops are a great crowd. Like, they want practical stuff. They want you to be able to define it. You know, it was Einstein thinking. I didn't realize that at the time. You know, the attribution to Einstein is if you can't explain it in plain English, you don't understand it. And cops want you to explain stuff in plain English, or they're just not going to tolerate you. And I think that's where I really learned to just define it in very specific terms, which is how we teach it in a Black Swan group now, and how it is. They never split the difference. Like, say this exactly like this. Don't change it. Use these words. Here's the very specific words. Use the sequence. We'll tell you afterwards why it works, but you're not going to believe the why until you've used it yourself and been like, oh, wow, I guess it does work. So it's got to be explained in very clear, concise terms.
Do you think these fellas, Larry Wick, and the other more old-timer guys, it was natural that just through trial and error they had sort of inherently learnt these ways to communicate with people, or were they also operating off a playbook?
No, I think the only thing that's natural, really, I think we're all born with a blank slate. It's how coachable are you? Are you open to learning, and do you want to figure out how to do it better? Now, at some point in time, either you're going to see it get done, or you're going to notice it, or somebody's going to lay it out for you. At which point in time, if you're coachable, you're going to do it. A lot of people are not coachable. There's a psychological test called the 5-factor inventory. One of the things it tests you for is openness, which is also coachability. Like, you can be real smart, which is actually a handicap if you're not coachable. The number one factor that I think is coachability. Hard work comes very much after that, closely as a second. I mean, you're not going to get there without hard work, but if you work really hard and you're really stupid, you're just going to spin your wheels, doing the same thing wrong over and over, wondering why things don't change.
But if you think about Larry Wick specifically, was there a playbook for him to learn from? Or was this just trial and error over time, communicating with so many different people that he's maybe starting to consciously speak slower, notice tonality, listen, etc.?
Yeah, I think Larry probably, I never heard him talk about who he learned from. I think he probably just really noticed what was effective around him and was open to picking it up and trying it himself. And forgive me, it's WACK, W-A-C-K,
okay.
Which was actually kind of funny because Larry made some extraordinary cases, and if people would ever start talking about an investigation that others were astonished by, they'd say, you know, this was a wacky case. And I always knew they were talking about having learned from Larry Wack.
So you didn't really start consciously thinking about how am I communicating to people? How are other people successfully communicating until you're on the job? This isn't something you noticed in your home growing up or amongst your friends?
No, I really didn't, because I don't remember anybody that did it. And I was like, wow, how did that happen? You know, prior to when I was a police officer. My father, very direct, very high integrity, very, very hard-working guy. Sort of the definition of an assertive, which I'm a natural-born assertive. And often our default tone of voice makes people feel like they got hit in the face with a brick. And so that was mostly what was modeled for me growing up.
Nice. So obviously at the core of Never Split the Difference and also negotiation, it is this idea of good communication, or at least, you know, effective extracting from an interaction, you know, what you want. Not necessarily in a manipulative sense, but, you know, in a professional case, you have something you want to extract from the other person. Just more generally, do you think over time, in your own lifetime, the general level of communication has gotten better or worse because of the influences that shape culture and society?
Well, you know, I think we notice it much more because of social media put so much more of it in our face. Well, I don't really know whether it's gotten better or worse just because of what the media is calling our attention to. I think the middle of the bell curve on any generation struggles with their own experiences. If in your formative years up to age 23, you've never been through any really tough times, you're not that tough. I've heard some discussion that generation following the millennials haven't been more conscious of sort of the global recession that pretty much was hard on every family. I've heard it said that as a result of that, they're a little tougher. You know, in their formative years, they were seeing their families struggle. Now, that doesn't mean to say that the millennials, on an individual basis, on an individual human basis, that their families didn't go through some tough times and they learned a lesson along the way. But you're talking about, you know, a large grouping of human beings. So there's a difference between what's a generation going through and what's the individual going through. But you need, you know, tough times make tough people. Nassim Taleb wrote a book called Anti-Fragile. I love his writing. And he coined the term anti-fragile, and he said, you know, there's post-traumatic stress disorder and there's post-traumatic stress growth. And those that have reached the height of what they're capable of, human beings, probably really took a beating somewhere along the line and eventually got up. You know, it's a matter of if you get up. And doesn't matter how long you stay down. Everybody stays down for a period of time. Everybody gets crushed. But the people that become real superstars are the ones that got back up.
Yeah, I think from that book, he uses an example that an anti-fragile package, if you were to send it overseas, you would not write fragile on the box. You would, in fact, you know, state the opposite. You want it to be roughed up so it arrives better than it was sent. Yeah. But he also wrote a book called The Black Swan. Did you take that terminology?
You gotta be kidding me. Holy cow.
Was that the inspiration for the name of your company?
Yeah, it really was. I stumbled across that book when I was leaving the FBI, and I went back to school, got a master's, mostly because I didn't know what to do. How do I leave the government, get into the private sector? I need some help. And one of my colleagues pointed out Taleb's book, The Black Swan, you know, the impact of the highly improbable. And I'm digging into it, and he took that metaphor from, I believe, 16th century or so.
Hammurabi's law, yeah.
And they discovered black swans in Australia. And they're like, holy cow, this could happen. And I thought it was a perfect metaphor for what a great negotiator does. There's really tiny little things that make all the difference in the world.
This wasn't planned, but since you're such a fan of Taleb, it's quite serendipitous. Nassim Taleb is a very consistent theme throughout this podcast. And the likes of Russ Roberts, Brian Klaas, Scott Patterson, who have written a lot about Taleb and interacted with him quite a bit. So I even have a podcast called the Nassim Taleb and Inserted Podcast. So very consistent theme on this show. So this wasn't planned, but I mean, since, you know, he's been brought into the conversation, apart from what you've just said, the role, the influence that the idea of anti-fragile has had on your worldview, as well as the Black Swan being the name of your company, how else has Nassim Taleb's work affected your worldview?
Wow. You know, his philosophy overall, which keeps getting echoed, you know, he's a skeptic. You know, when I'm reading his stuff, I'm either underlining every other sentence, you know, highlighting it, or I get into it and I go like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, you are out of your mind. Yeah. And so it's challenging. He's a really practical guy. You know, having gone to Harvard, he bashes Harvard all the time. You know, the people who's thinking he hates. I think he calls them, you know, the Russian Harvard crew. You know, I'm like, okay.
IYIs.
Yeah. So, but those are the two principal things. I mean, I haven't read everything he's written. I would love to be able to find the time for it. But yeah, I will tell you now that I'm talking it out loud, one of the things, universal principles show up in different places. And he talks about curiosity and anti-fragile as being an anti-fragile characteristic or a superpower, for, you know, to paraphrase. And you start looking around, you see curiosity popping up. Derek Gaunt, who's head of my coaching and training, a brilliant negotiator, way smarter than me. He's always told people, stay curious, stay curious. You can't be curious and angry. Your mind is open. You're smarter when you're curious. So Derek's saying it. Taleb is saying it. I know I'm saying his last name wrong. And then I pick up Man's Search for Meaning a couple months ago because it's one of those books that if you're into reading to make yourself a better human being, and you kind of have to be. Everybody I admire reads like crazy. Mark Cuban, Warren Buffett. All these guys talk about reading all the time. The title that keeps coming up all the time is Man's Search for Meaning. And like, I got to read this thing. Everybody I admire reads it. In the middle of the discussion of surviving a concentration camp, he points out that the people that survived got curious. Being in the middle of a concentration camp was so horrific and so fearful that anybody that was there in a Nazi concentration camp, if they ever got to the point like going like, I wonder what the hell's going to happen next, they survived more psychologically. It was one of the greatest defenses if they survived physically. And then, of course, if you could survive psychologically, it increases the chances you'll survive physically because you're not dumping neurochemicals into your body as a result of fear and horror that they're going to kill you by themselves. Like this curiosity thing pops up again as a survival skill, a life accelerator.
How do you express your curiosity? What avenues are you drawn down?
You gotta override the default mechanism on a regular basis. And what do I mean by that? The default mechanism in a human being is to be largely negative. Your survival mechanism is to be largely in a negative mind frame. That's what we inherited from our caveman because the negative stuff will kill you. And if you survive something negative once, you're probably not going to survive it the second time. So all of your senses are on high alert for negative things. And the cavemen that survived were largely pessimistic. That's why they survived. We got nothing in comparison in terms of physical power to the rest of the animals on the planet. How did we survive? Our mental faculties. How did whatever version of man that we are outlast the Neanderthals? What was it there? So that's what we inherited. You got to override the mechanism every day. And one of the things I told myself this morning, I saw this book like God Winks, look for God Winks. And so this morning I'm thinking like, all right, so I got to look for the surprises that are going to delight me. That keeps me curious about what's going to happen today. Gets me out of my schedule. I'm very schedule focused, and task focused. But how do I stay in the moment? Like something's going to be hidden from me here today. I got to keep my eyes open to find it. And that's one of the ways I work on staying curious.
It's actually a deeply Talebian theme, the encouragement for one to remain curious because the curiosity could invite a type of serendipity. In fact, I think in The Black Swan, he explicitly prescribes that one should, for instance, live in a big city, say yes to the invitation, talk to as many people as possible because you don't know what the positive outcome will be, the serendipitous outcome from this interaction. And the more curiosity you have, the more sort of disconnected nodes that you might be interacting with, which can then lead you down these, incredibly serendipitous pathways. The pathway from you to go from cop to FBI's lead negotiator to best-selling author to now head of this, big agency is phenomenal, and I'm sure full of serendipitous paths. So to round off that, I sent this to Kiana in advance. I wonder if you got a chance to see it, but I ask every guest the role that serendipity has played in their life. So this seems like as good a time as any to ask.
That's a perfect question. And I'm talking to a guy about the possibility of doing some podcasts. He works for a talent agency out of LA. I'm sitting down talking to him. And I'm always digging into people's background. And he goes to work for William Morris Endeavor. And he starts out in what they call the mailroom. And he says, I read this book called The Mailroom. And all the top Hollywood players, they all started in the mailroom. Ari Emanuel, David Geffen, any of these guys. They started at the bottom. And as much as Hollywood, the entertainment industry has an opportunity for being cutthroat, I mean, these guys maintain their integrity. Now, they were fierce competitors, but they weren't, they didn't get ahead by stabbing people in the back, by bashing people. They got ahead on the core values of hard work and delivering, and people being able to rely on their work. He says, so I'm inspired, and I go get a job in a mailroom because the mailroom is like they work you like a dog. They don't pay you anything, and that's the way you work your way up. And he says, and so my first shot at getting out the mailroom, that I'm promoted up into being in the boss's office, and he sends me back down to the mailroom. Basically fires me. Unacceptable, can't cut it, get this kid out of my office, bam, back down into the mailroom. And now this guy is the head of a division in that same agency, having been effectively fired at one point in time in the same organization, kicked back out, kicked back down to the bottom rung of the ladder. And I'm like, I want to find out more about this guy and his philosophy. And we're going to change our hiring philosophy in a Black Swan group. And I'm going to bring as many people in as possible. And I'm going to say, here's what I'm on. I got a lousy proposition for it. And we got a superstar now, youngster. And this is what I told him. I said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to work you like a dog. I'm not going to pay you anything. And I am going to give you the opportunity to head an entire division. Like whatever you want to do. The sky is the limit. I want ultimately 30 people to work for you. I want you to realize everything you could possibly imagine. And the way to get there is this lousy proposition. No promises, no guarantees. You don't cut it in the first 6 months, I'm going to fire you. And the world is in front of you if you are willing to accept this position under these conditions. And he can't get enough of it. I didn't make him any big promises. I want people that are ambitious and have high integrity. And just by me having a conversation with this guy, like, what's your background? How'd you get into this? This is what I was inspired by. And I failed in a huge way. And the organization that I work for let me start over, and now I'm in charge of an entire division. And I thought, that's the way I want to run this.
So that might be a more recent moment of serendipity where a conversation had a huge change in the way you run your business. If you cast your mind back to the hostage negotiation days, the terrorism negotiation, or even back on the force, were there any pivotal moments of serendipity that offered an incredibly divergent fork in the road, which you took?
Yeah. When I was in New York and I was trying to decide, me and several other guys made some huge cases because we worked really hard and we had great prosecutors. I mean, a definite team effort. And everybody was working their way up the line. And there were basically 5 of us. I was last on a list. The other guys were more talented than me, did more than I did. Well, it was kind of a progression, and those guys got promoted ahead of me, and I didn't begrudge them for it. So I'm basically last in line. Upper management changes. New guy comes into New York that doesn't like me at all. I've always described myself as a loose cannon that always hits the target. And this guy didn't care that I hit the target. He didn't like loose cannons. He didn't want to know about anything. He didn't want anything to happen that he didn't know about in advance. And I'm trying to make up my mind, am I going to stay in New York, be a terrorism guy for the rest of my career? I had aspirations to going on to ultimately maybe heading up the FBI's terrorism division in New York City. Where was I going to go? And do I do this? Do I be a hostage negotiator? Because at that point in time, I'd also negotiated a Chase Manhattan bank robbery, where I had, a unicorn event under my belt that went really well. What do? Do I go terrorism for the rest of my life? New York City, love New York City. Still the places I'm happiest on earth. And this new guy came in, had no time for me. And I went to him and sort of informally felt him out. And to his great credit, in a very nice way, he let me know that he was never going to support me to go up the line in New York.
How
He
about
didn't
that?
want me in his division. He didn't want me under his roof. Fortunately, he was not a vindictive guy, which meant if I decided I want to go elsewhere, he wasn't going to block that because he wanted me out of his house. And so I decided, you know what, let me go down and be a full-time hostage negotiator. That guy down there, Gary Nessner, another mentor, seems very, not just seemed, was extraordinarily supportive of me. He stopped me one time in a restroom of a bar saying, like, when are you coming down? You know, what do I got to do to get you down to Quantico to see you? I'm like, yeah, you know, I'm in New York. I'm terrorism. I was, and I thought, this guy in New York doesn't want me. And Gary, great mentor. I'm going that way. And thank God I did, because then it opened up a whole new chapter in my life that never would have happened if I'd have stayed in New York, if that guy hadn't decided I was on his naughty list. I wasn't on his nice list.
That's phenomenal, Chris. Like exactly the type of anecdote which I'm hoping for when that question is asked. Because, you know, had the fella in New York maybe just seen a loose cannon who never missed, that maybe might have been a nonetheless a valuable person to have around, then we wouldn't have gotten Never Split the Difference and everything that would have come from that. Did you write that yourself?
All right, so it was a collaboration between myself, my son, and Tahl Raz.
Because it's so clearly written, so like phenomenally written, actually.
The clarity of the writing is Tahl Raz. Tahl Raz is a genius business book writer. I don't think there's a better collaborator for a business book on earth. And one of the things that I learned from that experience is nobody can write everything. Like I wouldn't buy a children's book that Tahl wrote, or Tahl wrote poetry. You know, I wouldn't buy it. And you know, and we recently had someone who has a master's in creative writing had a brief stopover in my company, and you'll get a master's, and the people that gave you that say you can write anything. And this person was convinced could write books, could write short copy, 5-word copy, could write blog posts, and I'm like, no. You're gonna be really good at one thing, and Tahl is really, really good at business books. Yeah. If Tahl's name is on a business book, read that book.
Nice. What an endorsement. But look, we're halfway in and we haven't addressed negotiation nor the book. So as a way to enter it, you alluded earlier to your Harvard days, and the saying getting to yes was really like the holy grail of negotiation theory. And then there's this quote from the book that just emphasizes how different your style was to the prevailing norms. It seems like all you do to these Harvard guys is say no and stare at them until they fall apart. So, you know, what had you discovered that this prevailing negotiation theory was missing?
You know, the bare knuckles brawling of kidnap negotiation and hostage negotiation. You know, it's just human nature. And you learn real fast what works and what doesn't work. And in my hostage negotiation days, I remember reading Getting to Yes and thinking, like, this makes so much sense. And every one of us that read it said, this makes so much sense. And in my hostage negotiation world, none of us turned around and said, yeah, we solved this case reading this. Not one. And, you know, I think that's one of the appeal. The book is academically, just darn near academically flawless. And in the nitty gritty of the real world, human beings are not academically flawless.
Yeah.
And so just learning what works real hard, and then turn around and bringing it back, and having people say, all right, so try this. Even before Never Split the Difference came out, when I was teaching in business schools, I made the students try it in real life. And they started knocking it out of the park on a regular basis. So, you know, I may have rambled from your question a little bit, but the practicality of what actually works was really what guided and picking it up a little bit here, thinking back to those detectives, thinking back to what worked on a hotline, and then trying it in real life. It was all practical application of the knowledge.
But more to say, what was the methods you had discovered? Because getting to yes was all about 5 steps towards a BATNA, but then you're coming in with a very distinct style of just open-ended questions and really thinking about the emotional aspect to everything.
Yeah, and then the power of those open-ended questions and what would end up actually happening. And the secret to gaining the upper hand is giving the other side the illusion of control. I mean, I would either say no to the Harvard folks, the Harvard students, or I would ask them an open-ended question, which would flummox them, simultaneously making them hear now, and then just wait. And those that pride themselves on intellectual discourse, they're going to start yapping. They're just going to start talking. They can't stand to have the silence. To them, silence is an opportunity for them to explain themselves. And so then, you just kind of guide them a little bit. And you're deferential. And you keep guiding them and guiding them and guiding them. And pretty soon you guide them to something you like.
Yep.
And then when they come out with it and you look at them and you go, that's brilliant. The art of letting the other side have your way.
Yeah.
And they would never see it.
I don't want to make you relive the book here. Really, the audience, they have to, if they want the prescription for how to do this, just consume the book, because as we've been through, it's very easy to consume. It's enjoyable to consume. But I can say one direct thing, which I've used so many times to unbelievable success is, I work in sales, and whenever it comes to say a touch of an end point, or we're discussing the commercial terms for the agreement, me just sitting back, hearing them say something, and almost irrespective of what they say, just how do you propose that we move forward? It is so powerful. It's unbelievable, actually. They will meet you on your quote most of the time, or if they don't, they're going to reveal a bunch of things irrelevant to the deal, which you can then just throw in on top because they mean nothing to you. On paper, it's nothing, but in practice, it's unbelievable, truly.
Yeah, a well-timed how question is a game changer. And that's exactly what you're hitting.
No. So, Khaneman and Tvesky feature quite a lot throughout the book. These are two fellas that sort of made a bunch of behavioral discoveries, or observations at least. And it seems they've really impacted your worldview. What did they discover, and then how did it affect negotiation theory?
Well, principally, prospect theory, and there are a lot of thinkers around them in the same realm. And I think they either worked with Khaneman and Tvesky, or they learned from them along the line. But, the synopsis, a loss things twice as much as an equivalent gain. You're more likely to make a decision to avoid a loss than you are to accomplish a gain, which runs contrary to all persuasion thinking. Persuasion is you lay out the game. Tell them what they have to gain, and the loss will be obvious to them. Well, no, that's not the case. So it's flipping it on the head. And the thing that I like about Khaneman and Tvesky, especially Michael Lewis's book, The Undoing Project, goes into great depth on how those guys developed their theory. They were contrarian. They were disruptive. They meant to disrupt the establishment. I think one of the comments that really threw them off, they spent so much time attacking the establishment that when they became the establishment, they didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
But they were very practical. They didn't run extensive academically rigorous studies with students in false circumstances. They were asking people in their lives questions. Human beings on a regular basis. They're posing questions to human beings under actual circumstances. Then they're pulling the data, and then they're applying it. And I realized then, I can't remember at what point in time it became, I know what it was. In a hostage negotiation, you're always taught to look for the loss. There's going to be a triggering event within 24 to 48 hours of the current incident that's going to signify a loss to the instigators of the incident and dig in, because you're going to look for loss. That's the motivating factor for the behavior, overwhelming every other thing. So in practical terms, I'm taught hostage negotiation, look for the loss, look for the loss. That's our triggering event. That's how we can quickly unravel this whole mess. And after having learned that in practical terms, then seeing Khaneman and Tvesky saying, it's not just crisis, it's human nature. The loss is the dominating factor, not the only factor, but appreciate what it means that it's the dominating factor. And that's among the things that I began to realize, that my hostage negotiation emotional intelligence wasn't just for people in crisis. Because they were in crisis, what it is how people are wired. And then I started really digging much more into Professor Khaneman and Professor Tvesky's stuff. Danny Khaneman, Professor Khaneman, not deceased, but what the two of them gave planet Earth in terms of human learning is phenomenal.
Is there a direct experience you could recall where, because of something Khaneman and Tvesky observed, you could apply it in a real life negotiation? It doesn't have to be terrorism or hijacking. It could be something of the Black Swan.
Well, the how am I supposed to do that? It triggers a potential sense of loss or in people on the other side, because it makes them look at like, all right, you're threatening to take this away if you say, how am I supposed to do that? But you're not explicitly saying it. It's a general way to put a refusal. There's a difference between what you say and what they hear. I'm coaching, shortly after I get out of the FBI, I'm coaching a young lady for free, because it's in the early days, the book isn't out. She's been held hostage to the future. What does that mean? Companies getting her to do a lot of PR work for free because of all the opportunity it's going to give. All this great you do this promotional stuff for us for free, and the world will be your oyster. We'll make all these referrals. So she's working 6-7 months for free. The world ain't opening up. Now she feels hostage. She feels if she doesn't continue and they're not paying her, that now they're going to badmouth her. And I say to her, look, get them on the phone and just say, how am I supposed to continue working for you and not getting paid? And she freaks out. I can't say that. They're going to fire me, so I got to talk her off the ledge. I do a little crisis intervention. It takes her 2 or 3 days to work up the courage to get them on the phone and say, how am I supposed to do this? And she lays it on them, and they say, you're right, you can't. Now, she didn't say she couldn't do it. But what she said and what they heard, and what she said was, pay me or I quit. What they heard was, pay me or I quit, which is a loss to them. They know how valuable she is, but until they're afraid of losing her without being threatened, they won't come up with the money. And that was, why does this work? How is this so effective? It's the triggering of loss in the other side without threatening it directly, without making you a threat. It's putting the image in their head, what you say and what they hear. And she said, how am I supposed to do that? And their response was, you're right, you can't. That's not a direct response to what she said. They're responding to what they felt, not what she said.
And this is all because of the well-timed, open-ended how question.
Exactly.
What are some other prefixes people could maybe think of for just well-timed, open-ended questions?
Well, if somebody won't do something because the cost in the moment is too high and they're not looking at the long-term prospects of how it's going to save them money. This is a typical interaction, whether it's finances, transaction. People are really worried about what's the loss in the moment versus the loss long-term. The whole phrase, penny wise, pound foolish. You're tripping over dollars because you're trying to pick up pennies. That's when you're very short-term focused. How do you get somebody out of short-term thinking into long-term value, for lack of a better term? And the question is going to be, what happens if you do nothing? Because they're getting killed over the long term on whatever it is. The comfortable inaction. which is sort of the bane of mankind's existence. Kennedy quote in the early 60s along those lines, the risks and costs of comfortable inaction. How do you get somebody to think about that? A well-timed, what happens if you do nothing? Makes them consider the long-term cost of comfortable inaction.
Do you feel, I had this this sense just then while you were responding that speaking to you, you're probably extremely perceptive to, say, my own communication. You know, am I being honest? Am I being sincere? Am I nervous, etc.? Do you, one, are you thinking that? But furthermore, do you think people are maybe more guarded, until they know you, of course, but initially more guarded in speaking to you because you have this aura of a communication expert who can immediately spot what you're trying to do?
Well, there's actually a predictable progression. They're usually immediately intensely fascinated and curious and can't get enough. So they're not guarded at all at the very beginning, usually. And then they get going. Holy cow, you're analyzing me. You're probably doing this to me right now. Because their amygdala's kicked back into gear.
Yeah.
They were curious and they were open. And then their amygdala jumped in, the survival mechanism that we all got to fight. And then, if they actually start listening to the interaction and going back to their gut, they realize that their gut is telling them it's okay. And it usually takes a while, unless you intentionally trigger your gut, it usually takes a while for the gut to override the amygdala.
And so, are you maybe making observations of my own communication throughout this chat?
No, not specifically. I just let my gut tell me. You know, I rely very much on my comfort. I also know there's some predictable triggers early in an interaction, which I listen to very closely. So if I got alarm bells going off early, I listen to those alarm bells. So, somebody once said it's not the red flags, it's the yellow flags.
Oh yeah, what does that mean?
So I'm highly conscious of the yellow flags. And some of them are very predictable, and I know what they are. And, in the first 10 to 15 minutes, max, I'm going to be listening to my gut. And then that's all the analysis I do. Because I'm into long-term collaboration, period, for prosperity on both sides. So I let my gut guide me.
Speaking of, pure instinct, gut feeling, if someone is learning these methods of communication, learning that I need to intentionally lower my voice, give you the DJ, or open question at the perfect time, do you think that the gut instinct can sense someone's faking it? Like, that distance between a natural versus a person putting it into practice, the gut can tell the difference.
Yeah, well, they can, and are they faking it or are they just off? And you might feel insincere. That's really one of the big problems, is people forget that it's all learned behavior.
Right.
So there's going to be something in the Black Swan method that's going to be counter to what you're doing. And you will have forgotten that what you're doing was learned. You'll think it's you being authentic.
Right.
And as soon as I try to get you to take a different style, you're like, oh my God, I'm being inauthentic to myself. Well, it's all learned. Understanding that it's all learned. And every now and then somebody's tonality is what will throw you off immediately. Like I teach you the technique of mirror, which is repeating the last 1 to 3 words, or selected 1 to 3-ish words.
Mm-hmm.
When people first start mirroring, they'll sound like a robot.
Feel like a phony.
And they'll say, I mirrored my wife and she got really angry. Well, it wasn't that you were mirroring, it's a way that you were doing it.
Right.
And that's what triggered it. Your wife's gut's going to kick in because she's got a lot of data. But she's not going to kick in based on what you say. She's going to kick on based on how you said it. And your significant other, male or female, they got a lot of data in their gut as to how you react.
Exactly.
And it's really going to be tone of voice.
In anticipation for speaking to you today, Chris, I've been deep into a lot of your interviews, the book, etc. And so mirroring was really top of mind. And I noticed I was in a meeting and I was totally mirroring this person, their body language, their tonality, their cadence. And I had to stop and think, this is borderline manipulative at this stage. What am I doing? And then I reverted to the opposite and was anti-mirroring them, like just doing the opposite, and which is both probably counterproductive for many, many reasons. But I don't know, that I'm sure this is something you have to address all the time, but that line between manipulation versus what's a better word?
Persuasion.
Exactly, that's the word I was looking for. It's a slippery slope, I would imagine.
It's keyed by intention. Like, where am I trying to take you with the tools, the skills? Am I trying to exploit you? The skills are neutral. And my favorite analogy is a scalpel. In one person's hand, it'll save your life. In another person's hand, it's a murder weapon. The scalpel is neutral. The tool is neutral.
Right.
What's your intention for its use? And intention has a smell. So if my intention is great long-term collaboration, you're gonna smell that from me. You're gonna feel it. You're gonna know it, and you say to yourself, "Oh, I just labeled me. I just used an oriented question." It's gonna be okay, because I'm not trying to exploit you. Simultaneously, if either one of us smell bad intent, short-term gain, period.
Right.
Purely transactional. I don't care how badly this affects you. We should break off the interaction very early on. It's not a sin to not get the deal. It's a sin to take a long time to not get the deal. It's also a sin to take a long time to get a bad deal.
We've got a few more minutes, Chris. Let's see if we can pump these ones out. So a couple of observations I want you to make of traits from people you know. The first being, a quote from the book is that the negotiator's work is emotional intelligence on steroids. And so what are the traits in people you know who have the highest emotional intelligence?
I think probably they actually like people. They like human beings. They don't have a distaste for people. And, they want to have a positive influence on the planet, if you will. What was the job said? Make a dent in the universe.
Yeah.
Dent in the universe. Those people want to make is positive.
Okay, so just simply wanting what's best for people, liking people genuinely, you would classify that as emotional intelligence?
Well, it's a precursor to it, because emotional intelligence is a people business, and if you don't like people, you're not going to get good at it.
Think of a person in your mind. They've just got off the charts emotional intelligence. So they care deeply about people, but some parts of their behavior that are characteristic of that emotional intelligence.
Wow. They're always trying to fix it. Most of the people in my company are like that. I mean, we intentionally recruit across the board people that we like to work with, and are trying to make a difference. And if both aren't there, they're not going to last. So nearly everybody in my company, I think. I mean, my son. And, my son's biggest problem is he's so much like me. Which means he doesn't want to work for anybody.
Nice.
Even his father.
Yeah.
But my son is Brandon Voss. His heart's in the right place. And then simultaneously, we're all deeply flawed. I mean, I think some of the recognition is perfection is a fool's errand, whether it's perfection in your heroes, whether it's perfection in your life, especially in your heroes. Perfection's a fool. To assume that your heroes are perfect is insanely naive and sets you up for a tremendous amount of disappointment. And everybody is deeply flawed, and you're going to find some way to criticize somebody no matter who it is. Other than Mother Teresa, I think you got to go out. It'd be a hard time criticizing Mother Teresa. You'd have to dig pretty hard.
Oh, Chris, I've got some literature for you then, mate. Christopher Hitchens. You ever heard of this fella?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Well, I mean, if Mother Teresa has a place close to your heart, then maybe you should steer away from him. But he wrote a book about her, and he called it, well, actually, it's a bit uncouth. Is Mother Teresa important to you? Because I don't want to say it if it is.
Well, I
No.
would never make myself believe that she didn't have flaws.
Okay. Well, then, yeah. I mean, I suppose this proves the point that you were making. She was herself, reportedly a deeply flawed individual, as well as potentially, the first female saint. But
yeah, I don't know who's not. It's sort of the definition of being a human being.
Regarding hiring for emotional intelligence, do you test for that, or is it all gut?
We test for it, but sort of in a gut instinct way.
Okay, nice.
I've got a very specific methodology for drawing out of you what your core values are. Or, I listen, I'm deeply curious, and I dig in, which, like if we're hiring somebody and I'm the last interview, my senior leadership team is always afraid what I'm going to find out that they didn't.
Nice. You hire mostly Americans, or do you have Europeans, Australians, Asians on your staff?
I'll hire anybody with talent. Now, currently, we've only got one person outside of the U.S., but we're slowly turning into a global operation, and it doesn't matter to me. There is no demographic that makes any difference to me. All I'm looking for is, do you have the talent? Are you coachable? Have you applied this? Have you demonstrated any sort of fascination with this and actually applied it?
Right.
Can you tell me stuff that surprises me about what you've done? And, as the just serendipity so far, only one person, we got a young lady in China.
Nice.
And she came to us. We didn't find her, she found us. And so, that no demographic limitations whatsoever.
The most charming and charismatic people think of the top 1, 2. What are very, very definitional traits that they have?
Well, I'm a little leery of charming and charismatic, because it can be a tremendous cover-up for really cutthroat aggression.
Yeah, wow.
So, and I once read, a charming alpha male is a very dangerous human being. So I'm a little concerned. If somebody's too charming, I'm a little leery. The people that I admire the most, I admire straight shooters. I'm a big admirer of Mark Cuban. I admire Warren Buffett. They couldn't be more different.
Totally.
Success-wise, Oprah Winfrey. Phenomenal. And so then what are my takeaways from all those people?
The way you talk about Oprah in the book was amazing. It gave me so much appreciation for how phenomenal an interviewer Oprah is.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
And when you really give it some thought, where she started from, where she is. Very few people that have covered that much distance. Started out with that many handicaps, and then the interviews that she's accomplished among the most volatile people on planet Earth. Star-studded celebrities. Pick one. Will Smith, J-Lo, Lance Armstrong, of course, that interview, Michael Jackson. The negotiations to getting those people into those interviews, and then realizing, Oprah in a nice way, she didn't pull her punches.
Right. Yeah.
She definitely got a velvet glove around those iron fists, but you sit down to talk to Oprah, you're gonna have an honest conversation with her, and you're going to agree to that honest conversation in advance. That's phenomenal.
Yeah, it's super cool. Look, I'm sorry. I know we're pushing up on your time. If you could allow just 2 or 3 more.
We'll go 2.
I shouldn't have left that one hanging. 4 or 5 more. No. So, in that case.
You got me past my deadline, so you've done a good job.
One selfish one, and then one which I'm incredibly keen to hear you respond to. Same consistent traits you found in the best salespeople you've ever interacted with.
Who view it as helping. And then consequently, intention has a smell. If their intention is to help you, then they can get away with pushing you, effectively mentoring you. They want you to do better,
Right.
and they're trying to help you, and they're kind of not going to leave you alone because they can really help you. And I think that makes the best salespeople.
At the risk of you taking a follow-up there as my second question, we'll let it hang. And just final with this one, Chris. Quote from the book: listening is not a passive activity. It's the most active thing you can do. You've participated in lots of interviews, featured on the biggest podcasts in the world. So if you blanket your entire worldview of communication over this question, what are the best features, the best interviewers you've ever sat down with?
And it may be a recency or an admiration issue, but both Lex Friedman and Andrew Huberman. And it's because I so align with their core values. And Lex is constantly using the word empathy and beauty and epic. And I didn't really understand what it meant till I heard Lex talk about it a number of different times. Like, if you will, my life hasn't always been successful, but there's some epic stuff there. You know, I hammered my way into Iraq 2 different times against the bureaucracy's wishes. And of all the cases I worked, there were 1 or 2 big successes, but even being there was epic. And scaring the hell out of the people, you know, of the stuff that I walked them into. And nobody got hurt, but it was an epic, especially the second time in rolling through Baghdad. I don't know that we had any actual successes at all in that, but the journey was epic. You know, the Iliad and the Odyssey. A lot of bad stuff happened to those guys that weren't successes. But, you know, what's an epic journey? There's going to be some failures there. And I really thought about that hearing Lex use the word in another interview. And just his desire for beauty and empathy and understanding, no matter who he's talking to. You know, I really admire his core values. And Andrew, my experience with him is a great guy. And listening to his interviews, he's so careful about packaging things so that it doesn't offend you as much as you possibly can. You know, he's talking about relationships, and he says all the data from the studies for heterosexual relationships, and I'm a heterosexual, but that doesn't mean I don't think, you know, same-sex relationships. You know, he goes out of his way to say, look, this is the best data I got, and I'm not taking a position on what your sexual preferences are. I just want you to learn. And to me, that's, you know, I admire that so much. So I guess of the people that spring to mind most recently, that I've talked to over the last 6 months, Andrew and Lex are at the top of the list.
You think they've got much in common with Oprah in their style?
They're both very gentle. You know, they're both very, very positive. And I think that's probably the commonality. I mean, I think, you know, there's a phrase in Hollywood, in a limo, out in a taxi. And somebody who worked directly for Oprah said Oprah's philosophy was in a limo, out in a limo. No matter what, at the end, she wanted you to feel respected and cared for. And the last impression is the lasting impression. And I think probably both Andrew and Lex, when you interact with them, they did not want you to go away hurt, unhappy, feeling that you weren't appreciated and respected. And they're going to make sure that at the end of the interaction, you feel respected and honored, whatever your perspective was. And Lex has got people from all sides of the spectrum on the most recent volatile issues in the world today. You know, Palestine and Israel. He's got people on from both sides. And he's going to make you feel respected throughout, and especially at the end. And I think that's probably a commonality that they have.
Amazing, mate. And I cannot no longer take advantage of your goodwill. So thank you so much for being generous with your time and your responses, and for having put together what is definitely one of the most readable and actionable and helpful books anyone who wants to get better at communicating could ever have. So tell us, where can the audience find your work and what you're doing?
No, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, the absolute best way, wherever you are in the world, is to subscribe to our newsletter, The Edge. If you go to our website, blackswanltd.com, BLACKSWANLTD.com, you're going to get an opportunity to subscribe to the newsletter as soon as you come to the website. And as you said, it's actionable. You give us your email address on a complimentary basis. You're going to get an email wherever you are in the world, Tuesday morning, about 7:30 in the morning. Actionable thinking, digestible, concise. Use it that day. And we've got a whole library. You can browse the library to look for stuff that pertains directly to you. And if you subscribe to the newsletter, it's the gateway to the gold mine. You're going to get announcements, training that we have, whatever you want. We're gonna meet you wherever you are in your negotiation journey and help you get better.
Unreal, mate. A link to that newsletter will also be in the podcast description. All right, Chris. Cheers again, mate. Really.
Ryan,
can't thank you enough.
The pleasure is mine. Thank you very much. An absolute pleasure to be on with you.
Cheers, mate.